where we watched medics rush those officers within the last 45 minutes. Katiera continues our team coverage.
Well, I can tell you it's very apparent that something is going on out here. On the entire drive out here, I've seen constant or heard constant police sirens going off. And if you take a look behind me right now, you have, I would say, at least half a dozen officers just in eyesight, just standing here blocking things off, conducting traffic. As we've probably already mentioned, we do have an officer, from what we can gather, non-life-threatening injuries, but you can imagine when things like this happens, the alarm goes up and people immediately jump into action, as well as fellow officers jumping into action, waiting and hoping for the best. Again, we are here at Eskenazi Health right now, and all the time that I've been heading out here while we're on the scene, you constantly hear police sirens going on and on as they're rushing to the scene, rushing elsewhere. But again, from what we can gather, non-life-threatening injuries. But again, when these situations happen, the alarm bells go off and people immediately rush to action. Of course, we're going to stay out here and stay on the story and bring you those latest updates as we get it. For now, reporting live, I'll send it back to you, Drew, in the studio.
I want to get you out to Eskenazi Hospital, where Katiera Winfrey is live. That's where the two officers were rushed with those non-life-threatening injuries. Katiera.
Well, Drew, I would like to echo what Richard talked about and just the massive police presence and the response to it. Our station is not too far from Eskenazi, and from the parking lot, I could hear the police sirens going. They just kept going all the way until we got here. And when you get here, you can see where they've come. You can take a look at the officers behind me. Some of them are directing traffic, but if you look a little bit deeper, you can see even more police cars down near the emergency entrance. Right now, not too crazy of a scene as far as energy and excitement or anger, but a lot of police presence. Not sure if it's all here as a protective measure or if this is standard procedure, but a lot of police presence, a major response as they try to get to the bottom of what happened. Richard is out on the main scene where police, as you also mentioned, were chasing a suspect. Something happened, and that's when the police officers were shot. Again, I'd like to reiterate that these are non-life-threatening injuries that we're talking about, but whenever you have officers who are injured, it gets this massive response, and people's concern levels start to spike. But we also had a hospital representative come out and talk to us and say that all of the official information will only come from the scene. Although the officers are here, they won't be releasing anything on their condition at this particular location. But as you can imagine, these police officers who are here securing the scene most likely won't be going anywhere anytime soon, and hopefully as we gather more details, we'll be able to bring you those additional updates from right here at Eskenazi. I'll send it back to you.
Another interesting point that we learned in that briefing from IMPD Deputy Chief Chris Bailey is that fellow officers were the ones who rushed these two wounded officers to the hospital. That hospital is Eskenazi, and that's where Katiera Winfrey is bringing us live coverage as well. Katiera, you were listening in on that news conference, and you have been witnessing the scene around you. Has it quieted down at all?
It has definitely quieted down from the last hour or so when we were first speaking to you. We had several officers right here at this intersection directing traffic. Those officers are gone, but if you look a little bit farther down the road, you may see one or two police cars still standing there. Definitely not a sign that this isn't a serious situation, but it seems like the urgency of it and the need to stand here and protect might have waned just a little bit. But as you can imagine, that scene where Richard and Cody are immensely intense, and just listening to what the police officers had to say about what happened, you can imagine. And these officers here are unstable or have non-life-threatening injuries, but if you listen to the news conference, they said the police car was riddled with bullets. They talked about the hood being riddled, the front end of the car being riddled with bullets. This all after they tried to do a few maneuvers to spin the suspects out of the way. So the fact that these officers have non-life-threatening injuries injuries. Some may call it really miraculous that it's happening. But again, the scene has definitely calmed a lot, but there are still police officers on scene. And as you might have heard Cody mention, we're expecting to hear from the police chief and possibly the mayor here over at the hospital around 3:30. Again, this is continuously developing a serious situation, a really big day for police today alone. But of course, we are going to stay out here and bring you those updates as we get them. Drew.
Let's go ahead and go to News 8's Katiera Winfrey, who's at Eskenazi Hospital, where the officers were taken. Police say one suspect is dead, another has been taken into custody. But Katiera, can you tell us anything about the officers' conditions?
Well, all we know is that the injuries were not life-threatening, and around 3:30, the mayor, IMPD's police chief, as well as the chief in Lawrence came to speak to us. They'd actually just met with the officers inside who were injured, and they were able to talk to them. And we were told that they expect those officers to be back on the streets despite having gone through this. Again, they are not ready to release those officers' names as they are still working on or assessing the threat level, but they have spoken to the officers, and from what they say, they expect those officers to be back on the street. Now, contrary to what we've seen in videos from Richard and videos from Cody, the scene has been a lot more clear and calm outside Eskenazi. Earlier today, there were police cars all over the place blocking this entrance, but now you can see operations looks like they're back to normal. But that passion Richard talked about with IMPD Assistant Chief Bailey talking about the passion into what happened today, we saw that same passion reflected in the words from the mayor as well as words from the police chief. The mayor called this situation and the situation with guns in Indiana an illicit marketplace of death. Those were the mayor's exact words, and that adding that we as a community, not only police, need to make a commitment to stopping gun violence. As you can imagine, their emotions were high considering they have two officers in the hospital trying to pull through. The chief says that a lot more work needs to be done to get crime under control here in Indianapolis. But as you can imagine, they have really high hopes for the officers, and they say not only do the officers deserve your prayers, they deserve your praise and admiration for waking up this morning and hitting those streets and getting someone off the streets and into custody, albeit injuring some of the officers on IMPD. But of course, we will bring you full stories in our later newscasts. Alexis.
And as we said at the top of the show, our traffic cameras caught the moments the officers were driven to the hospital. Take a look at your screen if you missed it. The red pickup truck in the left lane of I-70 is carrying the two wounded officers escorted by fellow officers to Eskenazi. Police shut down the interstate for several minutes. We want to go live now to Eskenazi, where News 8's Katiera Winfrey continues our live team coverage. Katiera.
Well, Phil, we've been talking about that passionate response that we've seen from law enforcement. Well, Mayor Joe Hogsett and IMPD Police Chief Randall Taylor expressed similar passion. Just before coming to speak to us around 3:30, they got a chance to go inside Eskenazi and actually meet with those officers who were injured. They say not only do those officers deserve our prayers, but they deserve our prayer and admiration. As you can imagine, the scenes both at the primary scene and here have been active. When we first got here, there were several dozen police cars. The sirens, you can hear them continuing to sound in the distance, and police were on scene directing traffic, kind of setting up a precaution here at the hospital as they waited for word for their fellow officers. Now, police say this thing is just another part of the war on guns that we have in this city, and they say this is a very important time to take account of that and not only have police officers step up and do more, but also have the community step up and say something. And so this is what the mayor had to say when it comes to gun violence in the city.
We not have the ability to shut off the faucet of guns that pour into Indianapolis. But I'll be damned if we aren't going to do everything we can to identify, to arrest, and to punish those participating in this illicit marketplace of death.
I spoke to the officers and to their families. Incredible people with great attitudes after such a tragic event. And I believe they'll be back out on the street in short order. I'm glad they exist. I'm glad our officers exist.
And Lawrence Police Chief also spoke briefly, not giving a lot of details, but only saying that this started as a firearms investigation. And police say while these officers are recovering and they hope to see them back on the street, they're not quite ready to release their identities as they're still assessing the threat level. For now, reporting live in Indianapolis, Katiera Winfrey, Wish TV, wishtv.com, and like us on Facebook.
Hand side of your screen, you can see that was I-70 carrying the two wounded officers right there. The red pickup truck is what we're talking about. They had other officers in the front and the back to Eskenazi Hospital, and that's where we find News 8's Katiera Winfrey. Katiera.
Well, Phil, we've heard a lot of passion from the law enforcement, and Mayor Joe Hogsett, along with IMPD Chief Randall Taylor, expressed some similar passion here outside Eskenazi. Before coming to speak to us for a news conference, they told me they actually got a chance to meet with the two officers who were injured just inside. They say these officers don't just deserve prayers, but praise and admiration. As each of these scenes have been extremely busy all day, it is now starting to calm down, but earlier there were a half a dozen or more officers here with sirens blazing and blasting throughout the afternoon. As you can imagine, as the situation continued to unfold, a lot of uncertainties. But the officers who took up space here, who stood here on guard, they maneuvered traffic around as they waited to find out more about their fellow officers inside who were shot. As Richard and Cody have echoed, the police have had a lot of strong words about gun violence and violence in the city, and the mayor and both the chief echoed that. This is what the mayor had to say about gun violence.
We may not have the ability to shut off the faucet of guns that pour into Indianapolis, but I'll be damned if we aren't going to do everything we can to identify, to arrest, and to punish those participating in this illicit marketplace of death.
I spoke to the officers and to their families. Incredible people with great attitudes after such a tragic event. And I believe they'll be back out on the street in short order. I'm glad they exist. I'm glad our officers exist.
And the Lawrence Police Chief also spoke to us during that news conference and said he couldn't give a whole lot of information other than saying that this was part of a firearms investigation. Reporting live in Indianapolis, Katiera Winfrey, Wish TV, wishtv.com, and like us on Facebook.